do you believe that people like regular civilians and citizens, should they have weapons? Like, should they know how to handle weapons? Like,
yeah.
And why?
Yeah, so I interesting enough, I get sponsored by weapon brands and scope brands here in the US, but I come from a culture in the UK where we don't have weapons. You know, you can't buy weapons on the street. You know, the only time I touched a weapon was when I was in the military. But here, I understand the Second Amendment, and I do believe that you should be able to protect yourself, but I don't believe that you should be able to buy an AR-15. You know, I think California is one of the most strictest states, and you can only buy one weapon every 30 days. I'm like, well, how many weapons do you need?
That's still a lot.
Yeah, that is still a lot. But I know it's actually all about education and training. I know I can do more damage with a pistol than someone with an AR-15 who doesn't know how to use an AR-15. And so I think with the right training, the pistol is just as effective than these big weapons.
So you think that rifles should be banned or not?
Rifles should be used for hunting. You know, use that for hunting. But to use an AR-15 to protect yourself and your families, you know, you're not in Baghdad, you're not in Tripoli.
I agree with you on that.
Yeah. But I'm not saying don't protect yourself. Everyone has the right to protect yourself, and I get it. You know, and for me, now we come to America, I will have a gun, and I will have a gun because I want to be in a position that I can help if I come across a situation like that. I don't see it as an offensive. It's more of a defensive tool for me. But yeah, it's all about education. You know, you put their hands. You know, my wife's come here as well. She's trained up, and she's very competent with the pistol from when she first got here. And there's a few of our friends, they're kids, and they're like, they have to have a weapon for protection. But when you start educating and teaching, they realize how to use it accurately. I came here and there was a friend of mine, he had all these weapons. I was like, okay. And he wasn't military, he was a civilian. And I said, well, have you zeroed them? He said, what does that mean? So he hadn't even zeroed his weapon. To his, so I'm like, oh my word. Thankfully, he'd never been into a firefight. So it's all about education. So I'm not saying no, you shouldn't have weapons. I think there should be a limit on what you should buy. But I also think there needs to be a lot of protocol before you can buy that weapon. Yes, mental health checks, but also there should be training as well. You need to hit certain standards on training, be able to assess the state of a weapon and make it safe, unload it, reload it, and then also be able to hit a certain target. If you can't hit a barn door from 50 yards, then I don't think you should have a pistol. So I think there should be just a bit more training involved.
So what are some things that, in your opinion, the governments are not thinking about or just absolutely doing wrong? Because some way, somehow, we end up having wars. And it feels like every few years, another conflict has to happen. Yeah. Why? I
have a theory on that where, it tends to be where there's oil, there's trouble. But, I have a theory that I see it now with some of the units, that their recruitment, because Afghanistan has been done now for a few years. There's guys in the military now, have been in 10 years, sergeants, staff sergeants, who have never been on operational tour, which is fine because it's that sort of period. But if you then have another 10 years, you've got guys that have done a full 22 years who've never had operational tours. So you're losing that experience. The majority of the guys, when I was in, did Afghan Iraq, are now civilians. So what you then have is you have an issue with skill fade within the military. You don't have the guys with the operational experience. You then also have recruitment issues. Guys, if there's nothing exciting to do, then guys and girls won't join. So there's a recruitment issue. But there's also defense contracts, which keep needing renewing. So my theory is that every 10 years, you need a war to reboost the recruitment, to keep the militaries, their skill sets up, and also to renew these defense contracts. And also ammunition has a shelf life. It will expire at certain points. So you can utilize that rather than wasting the money. So for back in the UK, we had the Falklands War in 1982. You had the Gulf War in 1991. You had September 11th, 2001 for 20 years. And here we are in 2023, and you've got Ukraine kicking off, and then there's issues potentially on the Pacific. So, That is my theory, but it does. It keeps the skill sets within the military, it keeps the recruitment up, and people start renewing contracts, buying new aircraft, tanks.
I feel like our capitalistic system, some way, somehow, keeps pumping out like all of this ammunition, tanks, technology, all of that, and we need it.
Yeah.
But then you have a huge amount of people that don't want any of that to happen.
Yeah.
And part of it, I understand, like I want peace. I don't want anything wrong to happen, and I don't want people to die. But whenever people want to push the other side and be like, we should have no weapons, no guns, no war at all, no, like the US should not be involved in any of these conflicts, or all of these countries should stay out of that. What do you think about that?
Well, I agree. If I had it my way, I don't think we should have wars. I'm not pro-war at all, but I do feel that it's better to have and not need than need and not have. If we then take away all our capabilities and functions, but then the bad guys have it, then how are we going to be able to compete with that? So, there's an element of maybe scaremongering as well, which then people then justify, yes, we need more ammunition, we need more guns and things like that. But there has to be a balance. You need to be able to protect yourself, but there's protecting yourself if attacked, but not be the attacker. So everyone has this perception because of Hollywood, that we're door kicking and we're blowing things up, but that's 25% of what we do in the Special Forces is that offensive action, which is what you see on the TV. But that is always our last resort. That is never our first primary role. Our main role, 50% of what we do, is support and influence its hearts and minds. It's being embedded with the locals, understanding the demographics, the politics, the tribal influences, which doesn't actually sound that sexy, and it's not that sexy on TV. And that's what I like about Tears of the Sun. It's actually, there still is the offensive action, but it's more the empathy, and changing the plan on the ground as well.
So how are you guys doing that in a country that is so different, with different language and all of that? Do you guys go out into the city and like meet with people? How are you able to learn all of that?
Well, you tend to work with their local forces, their local militaries, whether they're intelligence services. Sometimes you will dress up as locals as well. It may be you have intelligence teams on the ground working with those, or working independently, or you're there coaching or mentoring. You're training those locals, because we can't be there all the time. As we've seen with Afghanistan, all the Afghan police and military, were trained. Unfortunately, they fell quite quick. But yeah, it's just understanding the ground truth and not what you're seeing on TV. There's a whole thing at the moment, especially on geopolitical analysis. We have this perception of these countries being quite bad because what TV shows us. But when you're on the ground yourself, it's not as bad as everyone is making it. It might be a little bit of propaganda. A bit like the Muslim community, tarnished with a brush because of a certain very small amount of individuals who did a bad thing. Actually, the Muslim community is probably one of the most hospitable, friendly communities I've been amongst. And so that's where we get the guys embedded in that, because they're telling the ground truth, what's happening on the ground, and they're explaining the tribal influences as well. For example, I did a lot of work in Libya, and Libya has something like 1,600 tribes. It was go back so historically. So it's not as easy to say, well, you guys will run the East, you guys will run the West. You have so many other things and factions to think about. You're living and dreaming what these kids nowadays play on Call of Duty. That was your day job, day in, day out. The big difference from that is the smells, it's the sounds that you don't get through the screen. So I used to drop the bombs from the jets, and when them 500-pounders start hitting and the ground starts shaking, that's what you can't feel through the TV screen.